Thank you for that, Boogie. I'm sorry about that. I ended up leaving my mute button on. Didn't even know I was talking. So, as I was saying, uh, let me start over. So I ended up with the flu earlier this week, and I haven't been able to get around to doing the lives like I wanted to, and everything has just been pushed back. So I'll push back the dates for the due dates for the work that we have in our class. So we have the assignments, we got the quizzes, we got discussion posts, and everybody has been doing a wonderful job in submitting their work. And I've enjoyed reading every last piece of it. And so just know that this is a very, very large class, and not everybody posts for everybody else to see. Sometimes I get personal messages and I get DMs to say, hey, this is my thoughts on this. Can you give me some feedback? So today, I'm just going over chapter 1 of the new Jim Crow. And part of the reason for that is because this book is such a deep dive that I can't really do it justice. Part of the reason why we're covering chapters 1 and 2 this week is because it touches on the themes that that we're discussing. So we're talking about racism, bias, prejudice, discrimination, colorism, classism. We didn't get into the caste system, but that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about later. But it's this new racial caste is one of the things that we're talking about in the new Jim Crow. And that's why this book is such a heavy book. And we're only going to get around to doing chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll be moving on to Biased before we move on to Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. Now, here's the thing, right? Because this book is such a deep dive, I had made mention to the class, hey, maybe I'll just take this book and I'll break it up over a 12-week period. Yo, I'm a little guy. Over a 12-week period so that we can actually go really into the book, and we wouldn't just be discussing, the whole racial caste or discrimination or bias or racism or systemic oppression. We'll be discussing so much more because the way that a lot of this stuff, the new Jim Crow, basically affects Black people, specifically in the United States, doesn't mean that it's not practiced in other places elsewhere. So, it's fine, Empress. So here's the deal. I will go over a chunk of chapter 1 today, and if I get a chance, I'll do it tomorrow for chapter 2, just because I just feel so bad. My whole body is aching, and I probably look a mess right about now. But I want to go ahead and make sure that everybody gets the benefit of this. Even if you read the book, what are some things that I could probably give you some feedback on, right? So, with regards to chapter 1 of the new Jim Crow. Thank you. This chapter lays the foundation for understanding how systems of racial subjugation in the United States have evolved over time. So you can see that it has shifted in form, but never in function. So when it changes, it's like, all right, we're going to go from slavery, and then we're going to go into the black codes, and we're going to go into Jim Crow and all this other stuff. And it's all has the same purpose. And when I talk about a lot of this stuff, and this is why, I welcome everybody into the class, you have to remember that a lot of this stuff that was set up was not set up to be a white versus Black type of racial divide. Not at first. What happened is that it was more of a wealthy versus the poor. Because even when you start reading into the book, you start understanding that when the poor whites started aligning themselves with the poor Blacks, the people that had money didn't appreciate that. They didn't like that because they felt that it was taking away their power. So they needed to find a way to turn the poor whites against the poor Blacks so that they could all be on one side. And this is something that Alexander goes deep into, but I don't think you can really do it justice on how we're covering it this week. So she argues that these systems exist not only to oppress the Black Americans, but to uphold a racial caste system that secures white privilege. So much of what, we kind of go into is talking about white privilege, but how do we actually end up getting to the point of white privilege? Is it just white privilege from the standpoint of everybody that was white at one point in time was completely against black people. No, it wasn't like that. Part of it was, like I said earlier, it was about those who had money against those who didn't have money. And then once you started seeing that the white poor and the black poor started aligning, they had to find a way to break that. So let's start off with the birth of the racial caste, right? And this is basically going into slavery and the divide and conquer strategy. So, to understand America's racial caste system, we have to start at its inception. The earliest blacks arrived in colonies were often indentured servants. So, when this whole thing started off, it wasn't all about slavery, but they had to find a way to kind of, make it systemic. So, much like many of the poor Europeans, they came there as indentured servants. So, however, as the demand for labor grew, racialized slavery was established as a permanent institution. So it didn't start off with slavery at first, but it did transform into that to kind of make up for the labor shortage. So why was this? It's mainly because slavery solved a crucial problem for wealthy landowners. Remember how I told you earlier, this was all about money at first. And those who had money were basically pulling the strings and making the decisions. It's something that you see in our government right now. So before slavery was racialized, poor whites and blacks were natural allies. They shared a common economic struggle and in many cases worked and lived side by side. So this posed a threat to the elite, right? What if the lower classes united in rebellion against the wealthy? Pay attention to what I'm saying on this. What if the lower classes united against the wealthy? Well, in order to prevent this, the ruling class strategically divided the poor by institutionalizing slavery along racial lines. Because again, the poor blacks and the poor whites, they were basically allies in this. So black laborers were permanently enslaved, while white laborers were granted small privileges and rights denied to their black counterparts. And this is where you start seeing that racial divide. This created a powerful psychological wedge. You had the poor whites on one side, despite their economic hardships, and you came to see them. They came to see themselves as being superior to blacks. And this racial division ensured that poor whites identified more with the wealthy white class than the enslaved blacks, weakening any potential for solidarity. Now, that's kind of rough. If you have this whole thing where you see that this racial divide, this racial caste is being created, and why is it being created? It's being created to make sure that there is a divide. And then you have a lot of poor whites. They look at themselves as disenfranchised, wealthy, or disenfranchised rich people. So let's kind of go into the lingering ideology of racial superiority, because this is where all of this is going anyway, right? Excuse me. So one of the most significant takeaways from Alexander's discussion is that the ideology of racial hierarchy did not die with slavery. None of this stuff died with slavery. It still exists today. We just call it by another name. So by the time that slavery was abolished, white supremacy was deeply entrenched. White supremacy did not happen overnight. It did not just pop up all of a sudden. It didn't start with the KKK. It didn't start with civil rights. This is something that was over time, and that's why it's still entrenched into the ideology today. Oh, talking is doing a number on my throat. So, the economic and social order of the South had been built upon the foundation of black subjugation, and the end of slavery threatened to upend that system. So after the Civil War, the South lay in ruins, economically, politically, and socially. And for many white Southerners, rebuilding was not just about physical reconstruction, it was about finding a way to reassert their racial dominance. Alexander calls this a consuming passion. The desperate need to replace slavery with a new form of racial caste. And the result? A restructured racial hierarchy that came in the form of black codes, convict leasing, and eventually Jim Crow laws. And so for those of you joining, this is basically a recap of chapter 1 of the New Jim Crow. And this is for the class, The Roots of Racism, Bias, Prejudice, and Systemic Oppression. And we are currently on week 2 in the class. And this is just a recap because there is so much to unpack just in this one book. And I can't really do it justice by trying to cover everything over time. So let's start looking at Jim Crow and the resurgence of caste, right? During Reconstruction, the brief period when Black Americans gained political power and civil rights, white resistance was fierce. Black economic success, voter participation, and social mobility directly undermined the racial caste system. So, when federal support for Reconstruction waned, white Southerners moved swiftly to dismantle these gains. What do you think is happening now? There are so many gains that were done ever since 1964-65, whether you're looking at the equal employment opportunity, whether you're looking at civil rights, whether you're looking at any of this stuff. You can even start pointing out towards, same-sex marriages and everything else. There are a lot of gains, but how do the wealthy basically move to kind of keep control? They start dismantling this stuff. So as much as this book is about, discrimination and racism and systemic oppression, this book also speaks a lot to what's currently going on with our system today. You see that there are so many gains that's been done over the last, 50 years. It's slowly being broken down, dismantled. You see the president is bucking against, the judicial branch of our government and, trying to force crooked deals and stuff. It is completely corrupt. So, Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation, became the legal framework for this new racial caste system. And these laws not only physically separated Black people and white people, but they also ensured that Black Americans were systematically excluded from economic opportunities, education, and political participation. Oh, goodness. So you see, one of the things that's happening right now is the exact same thing, except that it's not called Jim Crow laws. So you start looking at the removal of DEI in the federal government, and you start seeing that, or not even just DEI, DEIA, and you start seeing that even people with disabilities or other minorities, they're being taken away, and these opportunities are being taken away. There's one of the largest professional conferences that's happening in Baltimore, right down the street from me, this month, and Trump has basically said we're not going to go there anymore and recruit Black talent because they want to control who comes into government and who doesn't. And they do so by making it legal in a way without saying we're not going to, hire Black people. So let's continue back into this. So Alexander highlights an interesting moment of disruption toward the end of the 19th century. An economic depression led to a rise in populist movements that, for a brief time, united poor whites and Blacks against the wealthy elite. A lot of this, yes, the Black engineers. And I am a member of the National Association of Black Engineers, NASBE. So I was actually planning on going to that conference, but not for government at all. So what you start seeing is that when there was an opportunity for blacks and whites to get together because of their what is it their mutual disdain for the wealthy, that's when the wealthy started getting scared. Now, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. A lot of the racial divide did not happen because of, it was just automatically that way that, black people and white people just didn't like each other. No, this was something that was orchestrated by the wealthy. The people with money orchestrated this whole new racial caste system. So the laws not only physically separated the black and white people, but ensured that the blacks, Americans were systematically excluded from economic opportunities, education, and political participation. However, Alexander highlights an interesting moment of disruption, which we were just now talking about, right? So once racial solidarity was shattered, Jim Crow laws became even harsher. So we start looking at the role of World War II. Jim Crow seems firmly in place by this time, right? And the cracks in the system began to appear during and after World War II. And this was because of the hypocrisy of American democracy. It became harder to ignore. Black soldiers were fighting for freedom abroad while being denied basic rights at home. And then the United States government was also deeply embarrassed by comparisons between American racism and Nazi ideology. And the contradiction was becoming too blatant. It was especially in the northern states where support for civil rights was slowly growing. Now, this laid the groundwork for major legal challenges to racial segregation, culminating in the landmark Supreme Court decision Brown versus Board of Education of 1954, which ruled that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, and the ruling marked a shift.
Dad, I'm done again.
Nope, no more. Time's up, little guy.
Yeah, you can't do it again and again.
My little guy is watching Bluey or whatever he was. So the ruling marked a shift. And federal power was now being used to challenge state-sanctioned racial caste laws. However, as Alexander warns, even as Jim Crow was being dismantled, go ahead, a new system of racial control was already taking shape under the guise of law and order. Again, pay attention to what's going on now. A lot of this stuff is happening now because they're looking back at history and they're like, all right, this is where we made mistakes. So let's go back and legalize our discrimination in ways where people can't say anything. If they say, all right, for Department of Treasury, I want you guys to prioritize populations that have higher marriage and higher family rates. They are basically saying, we want you to hire more white people without saying we want you to hire more white people and fewer other people. This is how they word things in a way so that they can legalize it and then they can discriminate legally against other groups, regardless of whether you're black, you're Hispanic, or you're, from other places in the world, Asian or whatnot. So Michelle Alexander makes a crucial point in chapter 1, right? That racial caste systems in America do not disappear. They evolve. And currently it is evolving right now. Racial caste systems are evolving right now. And if this was the case that she wrote this book, and it was out around 2011, 2013, and she was talking about that it evolved back in the 70s and 80s. What do you think is going on right now? Is that these racial caste systems are evolving once more. So as one form of racial control is dismantled, another emerges in this place, and that's what is going on. We have a new racial caste that's being put in place after Jim Crow was broken down and the black codes were broken down. And you have, you have white people in the country that feel that they are losing their rights and that they're becoming a minority and that they're being discriminated against. And so they come out with terms of, reverse racism and start saying that, white men are the most discriminated group of men out there. And that's not the case. What's going on is that you have, what you have going on right now is that they feel like they're being pushed out by people who have qualifications. And so I'm actually working on a book and I don't have a title for it yet, but it is kind of along the lines of the DEI is the new N word. And it's looking at what's going on in our society, what's going on at hiring, what's going on with racism and everything else, where you have people that's just using these code words to mean what they're not actually saying. Because if they say the other word, then they become, a target, basically, right? So, as this is why the transition from Jim Crow to mass incarceration was so seamless. Because as civil rights movement gained ground, politicians and law enforcement pivoted to a new narrative: crime control. So what do you think is happening? You have groups of African Americans that are still being arrested and incarcerated. You now have Hispanics that are being sent to Guantanamo and they haven't done anything. There's one Venezuelan that was over here legally and was going through the process. And once Trump came into power, then that person was carted off, sent over to Guantanamo. Something that was set up for terrorists, which was not even, it was basically a way for them to get around the legalities of having them in the United States. So this shift that we're talking about on how we kind of go into crime control and stuff, we'll start talking about more in the next chapter and even a couple of chapters after that, but we won't be going into detail. And like I said, I'm probably going to do a deep dive on this particular book, and it's going to be a 12-week long deep dive just on the new Jim Crow, because it is a lot of book and there's a lot to understand. But because of what's going on now, you can see how the moves that are happening today by our president and by our Congress and our Senate and everything, and how they are actually implementing this new Jim Crow all over again. It has evolved, much like I said, in other things. And it's always has been the wealthy that has been orchestrating this whole thing. It's not necessarily about a black thing. It's not about a white thing, because they're going to try to make moves that say, all right, the poor whites and the poor blacks, we're going to have to find a way to separate them again to make sure that they don't end up becoming allies. And they started doing so with the MAGA movement. So this is setting the stage for what Alexander calls the new Jim Crow. This is the modern racial caste system being upheld through mass incarceration and the criminalization of black Americans. But I think it has evolved yet again by having those opportunities taken away from those people who are minorities, who are black, who have disabilities. You see that there's attack on people who are neurodivergent, they're autistic, or they have any other type of disability, be it that they're deaf and hard of hearing, or they've lost limbs, they're paraplegic. You see what the president has said about these type of people in the media. He does not like them. He thinks that they are flawed, and he thinks that even the people that have gone overseas to fight are idiots. So what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen is that you're going to have this whole racial caste system, this racial divide happening all over again. But one of the reasons I am teaching this particular course is because we need to understand what has happened in the past before we can actually move forward. And if we don't understand, this system of oppression and the racism and the discrimination and how it started and how it wasn't necessarily started as a white thing versus a black thing, and it was orchestrated by the wealthy, then you can actually start seeing what's going on today. Now, there's quite a few people in my class, they are kind of struggling with, all of the unlearning that they have to do, because it is a lot. When you start looking at the implicit association test and you start looking at how do I break the mold, and I change myself. How do I change myself from getting from the point of being uninformed, being biased, whether implicitly or explicitly, and I get to the point of allyship and anti-racism. And we're going to get into that eventually over the next couple of weeks or whatever. But just know that next week, which is starting on Sunday night, actually more into like Monday morning, we're going to watch 13th by Ava DuVernay. And 13th is about 2 hours long. It's available to everybody. It's available on YouTube. It's going to be linked in the week 3 it's going to be linked in the week 3 resources and materials, and then the chapters 3 and 4 of the New Jim Crow will be going into that as well. And we're going to start deep diving into that. But just know that 13th is going to be a hard hitter for a lot of people, especially if you're in the United States, because a lot of people don't really understand what's going on behind the scenes. I know a few people were looking at the videos on the Central Park 5, and they were feeling hurt. They felt anger. They were emotional about it, and I've ended up with several DMs that were saying, "Hey, I don't like the way I feel because nothing should have happened to these kids. They were just kids." But rarely in the news and media are black kids listed as being kids. You can have somebody like Dylan Roof, and they'll put body armor on them and take them to Burger King, and treat them like, oh, they were just a kid that's misguided or whatever, despite the fact that they ended up offing a lot of people. And then you have people like the Central Park 5, in which case they were in the media, and then Trump took out a full-page ad calling for the death penalty to be renewed. So black kids don't really get the same chance as other people in this country, and we're also portrayed in a negative light most of the time. It's like 9.999999 times out of 10. Even with Ahmaud Arbery, he was hunted down and basically killed unarmed. They painted him in a negative light. But why? It's because of this whole system of the racial caste that we have in America. And again, if I don't hit home anything else about what's going on with the racial caste system in America, just remember that it was set up by the wealthy. It was set up by the wealthy to subjugate black people. So that's one of the things that's happening today. You have the wealthy that are creating this racial divide, and the worst thing that can actually happen in this country for them is that the poor white and the poor black basically become allies and start fighting against the government. But they're going to try to find some type of way that they're going to try to separate them to be on their side. So as long as everybody is struggling, that's something that is dangerous for them. And we'll be going more into this. I'm probably going to touch on it tomorrow if I can with chapter 2 lecture, and I'll be going more into a lot of the stuff on chapter 3 and chapter 4 as we kind of get into next week, because next week is week 3 for this class. And again, for those who joined, this class is the roots of racism, bias, prejudice, and systemic oppression. And so last week the week before last, we basically set the foundation talking about what bias is, prejudice, discrimination, racism. We understand that racism is basically, that whole belief plus power dynamic or whatever, or the prejudice plus power. And then you start understanding, more about how we actually define these things. And so this week was going over chapters 1 and 2 of the New Jim Crow, and it's setting the foundation of how we're going to move forward from here, because this is chapter 1 and 2 for this week. And then chapters 3 and 4 we're going to be talking about next week with regards to the New Jim Crow. So chapters 3 and 4 next week, but we're also going to be looking at 13th and peace, Chris. We're also going to be looking at 13th by Ava DuVernay, and we're going to deep dive. We're going to have a conversation on that, hopefully alive. And what I'm going to try to do at that time is bring a few of you guys up so we can actually have this conversation. I want to know what other people are learning. I don't necessarily want to sit up here and talk the whole time, but I would like to get some of you guys to kind of hop on and just be like, all right, this is what I've, thought about it. This is what I've learned. You don't have to get on camera. You can just do audio. But I do want to kind of make this a more dynamic type of thing so we can actually have these conversations. And that would be a very wonderful thing to do, because I think the more people that's actually able to, kind of share their knowledge or whatever, then the better. And, we can also kind of deep dive into how we actually have these conversations moving forward, because our week 8 thing is going to be how do we tackle what's going on with our system, and how do we tackle anti-racism and discrimination and systemic oppression. So does anybody have any questions, either from TikTok or YouTube, on this particular chapter? Because this is chapter 1 of the new Jim Crow, and we're basically talking about the racial caste, and this is part of the class Roots of Racism, Bias, Prejudice, and Systemic Oppression. This is week 2. We're going into week 3 come Sunday night, Monday morning, and we're going to be going into the new Jim Crow. And I hope everybody has been able to learn something, because I've been reading the feedback from the assignments and the discussions and the private messages and DMs that people have been sending me, and you guys are really learning. And some people are really, really, typing out. There's one person that sent me 6 pages of their assignment. But I'm glad that you guys are kind of working things out. You guys are working things out, and we are having this discussion, and anybody can join my class. It doesn't matter if you're late to it. You can still kind of go back and review the videos, and you can review the materials and the assignments and stuff. And even if you still want to turn in an assignment, go ahead, send me a DM with your assignment, and I will still read over it. I will still grade it. I will still give you feedback, because I truly want everybody to understand how we actually discuss these topics. Because if we don't discuss the topics, then you're going to be completely clueless about what's going on in our government currently today. So does anybody have anything before I end and probably lose my voice from sitting up here talking for so long? Hey, Miss Crazy Mommy, Money. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Don't worry, Coco. The video is on YouTube, so it's being streamed live to YouTube as well. And once that finishes on YouTube, it'll be saved, and you can go back and read it. So just know that I've set it up to where this thing is TikTok, YouTube, and I'm going to see if I could do some other platforms as well. Just because if you haven't heard of it yet, Trump actually passed. He actually passed an executive order that basically talks about they're going to eliminate any type of research that has to do with DEI, accessibility, disability, racism. There's a whole bunch of words that's been banned. Now, when I did my dissertation was actually on populism. So I did my dissertation on the relative strength of populism, religiosity, locus of control on climate change denial. And I had to really deep dive into what populism is and what populist movements are. And one thing that I can tell you, there has never been such thing as a populist billionaire. Yeah, everything is revenge based. So just know there's nothing as no such thing as a populist billionaire, and that a lot of the stuff that's going on right now has to do with in the name of populism, but it is really about making sure the wealthy get richer and they subjugate the other people, the poor basically. Trump does not like the poor. He actually despises the poor. But it's the poor that's actually putting him in the place that he's in now. It's the poor and the ignorant. So if you have this group of people that actually kind of supported him and put him into place, and now they're kind of going back and saying, "Oh, I regret my vote." They only regret their vote after the fact, despite the fact that people have already told them this is what's going to happen. So hopefully we'll get more into a lot of this stuff because we're going to touch on what's going on now in this class only because it's going to be applicable. The new Jim Crow bias, all this stuff is applicable to what's going on now and how we actually move forward. Oh, the checks and balances don't even matter anymore, Coco. The checks and balances are being tossed out the window. It's completely being tossed out the window. And this is why, you had, attorneys and stuff basically saying, you know what, take me out of this thing. I resign. I'm not going to, sign these orders or bring forth these charges or drop these charges or any of the other stuff because they see that the balance of power is basically falling apart in this country. But the best thing that a lot of you guys can do is understand and learn about how we ended up here and how we could possibly get out of here. So it's going to be difficult because we're probably going to be struggling for quite some time. But one of the things that I put on my TikTok was about anti-intellectualism. They want people to become stupid. If they get rid of the Department of Education, they're going to take away the support for a lot of the kids, whether they have disabilities or not. The IEPs are going to be going away. They got to put them up under state control. And then you have some states like Idaho that's basically saying that we don't have a responsibility to teach our children. So therefore, in Idaho, they're passing the bill that says parents are responsible for teaching their children. Oh, so this Bubbles and Sauce, this is one of the things. So Bubbles and Sauce said, if the checks and balances are out of the window, how could we use that to our advantage? This is kind of the next class that I'm going to be getting into at the end of this class is going to be talking about resistance and how to resist basically. And so it's kind of an interesting topic coming from a social psychology standpoint because everything I'm staying in my lane with regards to social psychology, but all of everything that I do is about behavior and understanding behavior. So the next class is actually movements that matter, the psychology of resistance. And so we're going to be talking about this, what makes a successful resistance or what makes a successful movement and kind of going from there. Because what's going to make a successful resistance and movement is that we all got to start learning. We all got to stay together. We all have to be on the same page because if we're not and people are just trying to go at it by themselves, you're going to have a hard time. Yeah, Eric Adams thing is crazy. So Mahogany, my children are homeschooled, and they have been since they were young. Part of the reason for me homeschooling my children is because I don't trust the educational system where I live. It is one of the worst in Maryland, and it doesn't. It's like outside of Baltimore. Baltimore is already pretty bad. This is lower than Baltimore. And so I have to make sure that my children are well rounded. But the other thing is, I want to make sure that my children are learning about their history as well. I want to make sure that they understand Black history. They understand that they have ties to a lot of things. And so on my side of the family, I have a Black side of the family and a white side of the family. And on the Black side of my family, I can trace things back to my 13th grandmother, Mataoka, which some of you guys know as Pocahontas. And then on the white side of my family, I can trace things back to my 13th great grandfather, who was one of the first people on the Mayflower. And so there's a lot of people that my children are related to because of who came over here to this country. But in order for them to get a well-rounded education, I have to teach them about that. They're not going to learn about that. And right now, Trump is making it that if you want to receive federal funds, then you got to take all of this stuff out. You can't teach Black history. You can't teach, Latin American history, Asian history. You can't do any of that. So how do I make sure that my children end up learning that stuff? I got to teach it to them myself.
Let me see. Let me see the map.
Yeah. And you can see that some of these kids are out here, they're really, really doing great, and they're homeschooled by their parents. There's a young girl, she was homeless, living in the stairwell with her mother and stuff, and she ended up graduating early, going to college and all this kind of other stuff, and she really excelled despite her hardships. But that shouldn't be the norm. Kids should have the support that they need, whether they have a disability, whether they're on an IEP, whether they're norm, all that stuff. They should definitely have equity across the board. So I'm gonna try to get in and talk about this stuff as much as possible and go through a lot of this stuff just from the bias, the discrimination, systemic oppression. But yes, I've seen the new math, crazy money. I want to be able to touch on all these things, but like I said, I'm staying in my lane. It's from a social psychology standpoint, but psychology is basically about behavior. And my specific thing is about social systems and how we interact with society, but I might touch on some sociology as well. But we're going to get into a lot of this stuff, and then as I kind of solidify how I'm going to teach, then I'm going to make sure that I'm probably doing maybe 2 or 3 classes just so people can learn. I have this belief that's part of my religious belief that if you have one person in a community, if basically you have a lot of people in the community that can teach something, then it's upon the community to teach it. If you only have one person in the community that's knowledgeable in something, then it is upon that one person. And so I'm one of the few social psychologists that I know, one of the few Black ones, one of the few Black and Muslim ones. One of my first papers was basically on Black pathology in the American Muslim community. And that's been cited in a couple of books here and there. That's in basically course books for school. And so I'm doing my best to just trying to make sure I share what I know, because when I grew up, I didn't have access to a lot of people who were knowledgeable. I didn't have access to scholars. I came from a poor Black community. I grew up in South Dallas. I grew up in a place where I was looking at my, my friends in high school being basically murdered, on the same summer that I'm going off to college. And then I've lost so many other friends. I grew up watching people get jumped on the corner, living through drive-bys and stuff. So I'm taking what I know. I'm just like, you know what? We got to do better. We have to kind of enrich ourselves. And that's why I'm glad people are really just kind of getting around to learning whatever they can. I mean, TikTok is great. You can hop on here. You can watch people, do their dances or do magic tricks or, share knowledge and information, because I love to watch these things as well. But I also like seeing the videos that give me more hope in humanity. And so there are some people that I see and they're helping out other people and they're helping uplift people. And I can't get on this app a day without crying. So I'm not sure about you guys, but the people that I follow are actually my heroes, watching them help other people. So I want to be more like that. I want to help other people. So if this is my way of helping other people, sharing my knowledge and kind of giving back to the community this way, this is what I'll continue doing. I'm probably not going to have millions of followers doing so, but I'm happy with what I have. And I'm glad that you guys are able to join me. And if there's anything that I can answer for you guys, any questions or anything else, you can always hit up my link in my profile. There's a contact link up there that you can click on to send me an email message. You can also send me a DM on here. You can send me a private message on the Google Classroom. Everybody's welcome to this class. It doesn't matter whether you're white, Black, Hispanic. It doesn't matter whether you're in the United States or you're in Austria or Korea. Everybody is welcome to this class because I want to make sure that people are learning. With that being said, thank you guys for joining me. If you missed the majority of the class or you missed most of this video, just know that it's on YouTube. You can click on my profile link, click on YouTube. This video will be up there as well. And also for people who are here, oh goodness, because I asked this to my class, what works best for you guys as far as learning? I'm trying to figure out people's learning styles, and I know TikTok is all about short videos here and there. Lives, you put up a live and you might watch somebody play video games or whatever. It's not really the learning tool. That's why I made sure that all of my stuff is on YouTube. But what is a way that works best for you guys? Because at first I was considering just doing, micro videos that I can at least post up to TikTok, and also making sure that I do my lives and that those lives are recorded. But I'm trying to find a happy balance that can address the majority of the people. So I'm trying to do this 80-20 Pareto's Law thing, and make sure that I'm reaching that 80%. Okay. Because if there's any way that I can find out how to make this better, then I'm going to keep making it better. And as I told my class, 2% improvement every week, how I present the information, how I talk about the information, how I, do the videos. I might learn how to, add other videos in it, or do, transitions from one frame to the next, or, I'm learning. Yeah, I'm Gen X as well. But I know that people are. Oh, congrats! You can do it, Mahogany. Um, but just know that I'm trying to find a way to interact with you guys. That's why I'm always posting updates on the Google Classroom. Hey, this is what's going on. This is how I'm doing. I'm sick or whatever, and I'm trying my best or whatever, or I'm be late on this. And I know that there are some people that's overseas, and so I know that they can't necessarily catch a live that's late at night, for instance, and that's why I was doing the lives during the day as well, at a time which they would be able to do it. So just know that I'm trying to hop all over the place so everybody gets the benefit. But I also know that there are some people, they are they're listening to the lives, or they're listening to the lectures that I do, and they're working at the same time. So they're working and they're just listening to it. So it's this is a learning experience for me, because all of this just popped up with the whole Hillman talk thing. We didn't have a chance really to establish anything. It was more like we're learning as we go along. And so one of the first things that I'm trying to do is ask what you guys need, or what you got, or basically what works best for you guys. So even if you send me an email or contact me or send me a DM, let me know what works, if you haven't already posted it. And I will try to adjust how I do this along with you guys so that everybody gets the benefit. And like I said, I have 770 people in my class. Luckily, 200 have only been responding and doing all the discussion posts, because that's a lot of things to grade. So it's a lot of discussion posts to go back through. It's a lot of assignments to review. It's a lot. So I'm doing whatever I can to make sure that everybody has the benefit. Yeah, I understand how that is crazy money. My grandmother had to go through chemo. My adoptive dad had to go through chemo several times, and it's not something easy to kind of deal with. And so, when I mentioned that I try to be accessible as possible, this is one of those things. I try to be accessible as possible. So whatever I can do to help you out, then just let me know. just like the people that I have at least a couple of people here that are deaf, and this format may not necessarily work for everybody, but at least the captions are there. And I wish I had translation. I mean, ASL interpretation, because that would make everything a lot better. So if I ever get to the point where I'm actually making money doing this, I'll probably have somebody doing ASL interpretation just to make it even more inclusive for other people. Yeah, but the other thing about this crazy money is that a lot of people are going to have to go over this again and again and again, because some of this stuff is new concepts. It's like we hear about the terms, we hear about the phrases, or we heard about these books. This is one of those things that we're going to have to kind of keep working at. We hammer it in. I don't expect anybody to understand any of these concepts in totality the first time we go through it, because it is something, the way that we learn is that we review information and then we review it and we review it again. Because for me, I have so many books. Yes, I follow Professor Camille as well. So one of the things that I had to go through in college is that we had so many books. By the time that I reached like my 6th year in doing my Ph.D., I realized I didn't know crap. There's so much stuff that we ended up going through, and we ended up, no, you're not going to play with the hand sanitizer, little guy. Go sit down. We learned so much stuff during the class, and then you realize that there are people that specialize in certain areas in psychology because they went into those areas after they graduated. And so that's why they were like, the first 10 years after you graduate, you're considered an early career psychologist. And it's like that with a lot of fields. It's like once you get a PhD, you still don't know crap. And you're going to have to kind of deep dive and learn and go into that stuff. And this is kind of like where I am now. I'm here. Dealing with racism and prejudice and systemic oppression and bias and discrimination. That's where I am. But let me go ahead, hop off of here. And tomorrow I'm going to try to see if I can do a live again, just to cover chapter 2 of the New Jim Crow. And that one will be recorded as well. So I want to make sure that people are getting the benefit of that class too. So even if you can't make it here, just know that it will be on YouTube. I'll make sure I go back and link it in the class as well. I try to encourage people to follow me on YouTube as much as possible, only because all of the posts that I put on the Google Classroom, I make the same post. I make the same post on YouTube, and I have the videos there. So I've kind of worked out a system where I can do this stuff. And thank you very much, Mahogany. Yeah, Psychology 101 is quite broad. It's like in Psychology 101, you only touch on bits and pieces of this stuff. That's why I have people who have doctorates in psychology that are taking this class as well, because you only touch on this stuff. You never deep dive. And with the way that the government is moving now, they're trying to make it so that if a college takes federal money, they can't teach this stuff. You would never be able to learn about racism and discrimination and bias if the college or university that you're going to takes federal money. That was one of the latest executive orders. They will take your money away if you're talking about this stuff. If you're talking about LGBTQA plus type of things, you have to drop those. You have to drop teaching those things at a university, or they're going to take the money. That's just the way that it is now. And so this is the way that we kind of get around that. We get around it by having these discussions offline. And I understand nobody really wants to spend their weekend, especially a night that's, learning. But I can assure you, the more you learn, the better you'll be. And so The only thing I can tell you is, guys, is just keep pushing. Learn from these scholars that's on here, that's teaching these courses, that's doing their best and trying to keep you guys posted on what's going on in society, what's going on with regards to the field. I understand some of these courses, they're like, oh yeah, I'm learning how to cook. And then you have other courses saying, hey, I'm teaching you how to resist. I'm teaching you how to fight back. I'm teaching you how to make sure that your rights, you have attorneys on here, you have psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, you got everybody on here. Learn from these people. Because otherwise, at a university, I can't teach what I want to teach. It's just not happening. If I go in as an adjunct, basically the School of Psychology is going to determine what you actually teach on. And you're not going to be able to teach what you want to teach. So the way that I can teach what I want to teach, I'm hopping on TikTok. I'm hopping on YouTube. And I'm saying, hey, this is how you can actually make a difference in the world. Yep, I've seen that course as well. Now, my thing for you guys, if you are taking these courses and stuff, make sure you give yourself a break. Make sure you give yourself some grace as well. Don't overload yourself with, taking courses. I don't care if you have to drop mine and come back to it later, but I do want you guys to take care of yourself. I want you to practice psychological safety as you're kind of going through these things and having these discussions or whatever. I've mentioned at the beginning of my course, if it's too heavy for you, back away from it. Because I understand that with everything that is going on, this is rough. Oh, trust me, I've been sleeping, Coco. I've been sleeping. The whole family were knocked out earlier today. So we were knocked out. Everybody was asleep. My kids are still in here now playing on their iPads and stuff because they like to be in here with Daddy when he's doing his lectures and stuff. Except instead of my teacher's assistant being over here, she's over watching Moana 2. Yes, I know there's no more time. You lost all your time on your iPad. It's time to put it up, baby. Yeah, that's my teacher's assistant who's complaining about not having time on her iPad. After a certain time, it goes off. Yeah, education can be used as a coping mechanism. One of the things that I love to do is read. I definitely love to read, and I definitely love to. Oh, thank you. I love to read. I love audiobooks. I love, just kind of picking up on things whenever I can. Love getting outside, but it's been too cold and wet and snowy and stuff for me to do that. And trust me, I'm kind of in the middle of nowhere. And when I mean I'm in the middle of nowhere, I live in the middle of a forest out in Maryland. And I got chickens, I got dogs. I used to have ducks. Looking at getting some goats and possibly a cow. And come springtime, I'm going to be outside farming and growing food. So maybe I'll put up some videos on that stuff too. Who knows? But otherwise, let me put the little people to bed. So for you guys out on YouTube and even on TikTok, my child is just sitting up here trying to look cute because she knows that she's about to go to bed as well. But I appreciate you guys being here, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Take care, everyone, and have a good night.